Rules regarding contingent contracts. The rules regarding contingent contracts are provided under sections 32 to 36 of the Indian Contract Act, 1872. These rules explain when a contingent contract becomes enforceable and when it becomes void, depending on the happening or non-happening of a future uncertain event. Since contingent contracts depend on uncertainty, the law lays down clear conditions to avoid confusion and disputes between the parties. The rules deal with situations such as the happening of an event, non-happening of an event, events depending on human conduct, events within a fixed time, and impossible events. In short, these provisions help determine the legal effect and enforceability of contingent contracts in different circumstances. Contingent on happening of an event, Section 32. If a contract depends on the happening of an event, it can be enforced only when the event happens. If the event becomes impossible, the contract becomes void. According to Section 32 of the Indian Contract Act, 1872, a contingent contract to do or not to do something if an uncertain future event happens can be enforced only after the event actually happens. If the event becomes impossible to happen, the contract becomes void and cannot be enforced. Example. A agrees to pay B 20,000 Indian rupees if B's ship arrives safely. If the ship arrives, the contract becomes enforceable. If the ship sinks, the event becomes impossible and the contract becomes void. Conclusion. Thus, under Section 32, a contingent contract depending on the happening of an event is enforceable only when that event occurs. Example. A promises to pay B if it rains tomorrow. If it rains, contract is enforceable. Contingent on non-happening of an event, Section 33. If a contract depends on the non-happening of an event, it is enforceable when the event does not happen. If the event happens, the contract becomes void. According to Section 33 of the Indian Contract Act, 1872, a contingent contract to do or not to do something if an uncertain future event does not happen can be enforced only when it becomes certain that the event will not happen. If the event is still possible, the contract cannot be enforced. Example. A agrees to pay B 10,000 Indian rupees if a certain ship does not arrive. If the ship sinks or is destroyed, it becomes certain that the ship will not arrive, and the contract becomes enforceable. If the ship is still on its way, the contract cannot be enforced. Thus, under Section 33, a contingent contract depending on the non-happening of an event becomes enforceable only when the event becomes impossible. Contingent on event happening within fixed time, Section 35. If the event must happen within a fixed time, the contract is enforceable only if it happens within that time. If the time expires or event becomes impossible, the contract is void. According to Section 35, First Part, of the Indian Contract Act, 1872, a contingent contract to do or not to do something if an uncertain future event happens within a fixed time becomes enforceable only if the event happens within that fixed time. If the event does not happen within the fixed time, or becomes impossible before the expiry of that time, the contract becomes void. Example. A agrees to pay B 15,000 Indian rupees if a ship arrives within 1 year. If the ship arrives within 1 year, the contract is enforceable. If the ship does not arrive within 1 year or sinks before 1 year, the contract becomes void. Thus, under Section 35, when a contingent contract depends on the happening of an event within a fixed time, it is enforceable only if the event occurs within that time limit. Contingent on event not happening within fixed time, Section 35. If the event does not happen within a fixed time, the contract becomes enforceable after the time expires. According to Section 35, Second Part, of the Indian Contract Act, 1872, a contingent contract to do or not to do something if an uncertain future event does not happen within a fixed time becomes enforceable when the fixed time expires without the event happening, or when the event becomes impossible before the expiry of that time. Until the fixed time expires and the event is still possible, the contract cannot be enforced. Example. A agrees to pay B 10,000 Indian rupees if a ship does not arrive within 6 months. If the ship does not arrive within 6 months, the contract becomes enforceable. If the ship sinks before 6 months, making its arrival impossible, the contract becomes enforceable immediately. Thus, under Section 35, a contingent contract based on the non-happening of an event within a fixed time becomes enforceable after the expiry of that time or earlier if the event becomes impossible. Contingent on impossible event, Section 36. If a contract depends on an impossible event, it is void from the beginning. According to Section 36 of the Indian Contract Act, 1872, a contingent contract based on the happening of an impossible event is void, whether or not the parties knew at the time of making the contract that the event was impossible. An impossible event is one which cannot happen at all, either due to physical impossibility or legal impossibility. Example: A agrees to pay B 50,000 Indian rupees if B can make the sun rise in the west. This event is impossible, so the contract is void. Thus, any contingent contract depending on an impossible event has no legal effect and is void from the very beginning.